Okay, so let's go over some common essay mistakes that I'm seeing. I'm going to go through this list, explain them. They're all explained here as well. There are links that I don't think are actually linking for you, so I linked them on Blackboard. I put the websites on Blackboard as well. So the websites for instance, passive and active voice and citations are actually on Blackboard. Okay, so when we are writing literary analysis essays, we always write in the present tense. So you're not going to say um, Nathaniel Hawthorne's story, The Birthmark, was about, right? It is about, because although Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote this story many years ago, we are currently reading it now. Literature always exists in the present, even if it was written a long time ago. So you're always going to be using present tense um, when when talking about the text itself. Okay, so no, in my opinion, or I think, or I believe, and here's the reason for that. So first, I want to say that there's some debate around whether or not we should allow people to use personal pronouns in academic essays, and lots of people have different thoughts on this. The way that we do it is changing currently. However, there's never a reason to say, in my opinion, or I think. So even if you say, we as readers, blah, 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 or um, I don't know, there's plenty of ways to professionally and academically use the first person pronouns. But saying, in my opinion, and I think is redundant. And here's why. You're the person writing this piece. So we know that you think this. We know this is your opinion. You don't need to spend the extra words to say that. When we do go over some essays, I'm going to show you an example of where I think someone uses the first person pronouns in an academic essay well, and then I'm going to show you an example of where I think it's redundant and unnecessary. All right, language and specificity. This one was a little bit harder to come up with examples for, but a lot of you are doing this in your essay. You're using vague language that doesn't mean anything. Every time you did it, I pointed it out. So I'd highlight it and say, choose a different word, choose a stronger word, choose a word with meaning and more impact. This goes back to the mini lecture I gave you on concision. We don't want to use extra words. But when we use weak words, we end up having to use extra words to make sure it's clear what we're saying. Sometimes you used weak words that were very general and lacked specificity and meaning and didn't clarify what you were saying. And so I had to highlight those sentences and say, I don't know what you mean by this. So whenever possible, we want to use words that are exactly specific to what we are saying. The words you use, especially when talking about abstract ideas, things like theme, right, are so important because that's what all the meaning hangs on, is the words you use to explain something. Text evidence. Okay, so the point of a literary analysis essay is to be looking at the literature and saying something about it that then you are explaining and supporting through the literature itself. Many of you just gave me a synopsis of the story you read, which is not appropriate. There was no text evidence to support your thinking around the text. So you want to avoid summary unless you're using it briefly in context to introduce a quotation. But you cannot submit a literary analysis essay, really any essay, without evidence. This is one of the things that you really should have learned in 101, that every essay needs evidence. When you're writing an essay, even if it's not an argument essay, every essay, to an extent, has an argument in it. The argument is your thesis. Your thesis is the thing you're trying to prove, right? When you are writing that, you're kind of like a lawyer. Like, it's not enough for you to just tell me what you think is true about the text. You need to now show me that that's true by pointing back to the text and providing that evidence. This is something that you have probably worked on at all levels of your education, from probably elementary school on. Text evidence, pulling a piece of evidence to support your thinking. That doesn't go away in college. You still need to be doing that. No general statements, root everything in text, with the exception of the hook and that possible end sentence at the end of your conclusion where you kind of broaden your thinking. You really want everything rooted in the text. I'm not interested in, not just me, the readers of your essays of an academic literary analysis essay are not interested in a general truth. The point of the essay is to be explaining something about this piece of literature. So if you're saying, the moral of the story of life is blah, 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 avoid that. That's not what this is about. It's not you may be speaking about philosophy in this literary analysis essay, but that even has to be related to the text you're analyzing. Do not just drop in these grandiose statements. In fact, the idea of a hook and that relating to the world closing, I give you that because it's a good way to get yourself started and it's a good way to get yourself exited out of the essay. But it's a little bit juvenile, and we kind of want to avoid even the grandiosity of vague statements, vague general statements there as well. All right, transition sentences. What I noticed a lot, and we can do more work around transition sentences at a later date, but I noticed a lot of people with really strong ideas that almost related, but they would put this one sentence next to another sentence. Both sentences had strong, independent, interesting ideas, the content related on some level, but the two sentences together were too jarring next to each other. There was not really a reason to put them next to each other, right? However, I understood why you put them in a single paragraph, and all you needed was one kind of logical connecting sentence between those two sentences. Again, for those of you who did this, I highlighted it every time I saw it so that you can go back and kind of see where you're losing the reader from one idea to the next. So transition sentences, there's like lots of different kinds of transition sentences. I think I gave you a link for that in Blackboard. I'll double check. But there's different ways. I mean, we can actually look at transitions in the future and learn the different kinds of transitions. But for now, what I need you to know is that your essay has to make sense, and transitioning from one idea to the next is essential for that. So if you ever see like, oh, this is a strong idea, this is a strong idea, but what's between them to make it make sense, that's where you need a transition sentence. All right, passive versus active voice. I actually didn't see a ton of this, but where I saw it, it was pretty obvious. So you want to avoid this. So the problem with passive voice is that it kind of removes the agency from your subject. Your subject becomes the thing in the sentence that is acted upon rather than the actor. And what I mean by that is this example. The honey was eaten by the bear. The bear ate the honey. Ooh, there's a typo there. The bear ate the honey. So the bear is the thing doing the action, doing the eating, right? You need to position the bear at the beginning of the sentence to make it an active sentence. Active sentences, as you notice, as opposed to passive voice, active voice uses less words. It's more direct. It's stronger. It gets to your point. This goes back to concision as well. It just is a clearer way to communicate. All right, citations. You should always, when you're writing anything ever, review the latest version of MLA. MLA updates every few years, and the way of doing citations changes. So what you learned in high school, for instance, may no longer be true for in-text citations. One thing I'm noticing is you are, in this case, in this essay, you're only writing about one text. You should only be writing about one text, and that means you're only writing about one author. Because you're only writing about one author, you do not have to put the last name of the author in the parentheses at the end of a quote. All you really need is the page number, or as we'll see in the example essay we look up, you can actually be using paragraph numbers as well, if that will make it more specific, because these stories were in your anthology, in your big book. So the fact that the page number you're referencing is, page 1245, that's not that useful to us because that's not the page of the story itself, right? So you can go to paragraph numbers if you prefer. If you do, you have to put PAR and then the number. If you're using a page number, you don't even have to put page. The most latest citation, you just put in the number itself. And then context. I'm seeing folks, even more advanced writers, saying, for instance, in the text it says that that's not really appropriate for context. The point of context is that you are letting your reader know what is happening in the text before this specific quotation you use. So what is happening? What is the character saying? What are they doing? What is the little tiny bit of summary or background information we need before we get to that quotation that supports your idea? That's really important. And in the text it says, does not provide any of that information. All it lets your reader know is that it's from the text, but we know that already because of the quotation marks, right? So be really careful to make sure, again, your audience for your essay, you should be thinking of someone who is intelligent and sharp and wants to read the essay but has not read the story that you've read. And you need to make things, contextualize things in that way, where anybody could read this essay and have a sense of what you are saying about this text, even if they haven't read the story you're writing about. All right, so that is common mistakes. I think I'm going to stop this video now so we don't get too cluttered and go on, make a different video for your two essays.